Hello everyone and welcome to day 81 of my 100-day project. This is day 2 that I am working with these Neoart wax pastels, and I am doing this today on a piece of the Canson MiTientes Velvet paper. And this is from their pack that's got different shades of browns. So I picked a darker brown today, and I tested this paper out yesterday, and these wax pastels work beautifully on this paper. I loved the way the soft pastels, when I was in that 10-day window, I really loved how they worked on this paper, and the wax pastels work just as beautifully. Now, they don't blend as easily as they did on the watercolor paper, but neither did the soft pastels either. That's one of the great things about it, is it really grips onto the pigment. So with soft pastels, you don't get as much dust, but with the wax pastels, they don't move quite as much. So you do see a bit of that brown coming through, and there are some spots where I went over it, like her nose. I really struggled with her nose, and then I had to move her mouth because I had to fix her nose. So those areas, if you look really closely, you'll see the pastel is built up pretty thickly, and so you don't see any of the background paper there, but in the rest of the piece you do. So I do have some of this paper in white, and I might try doing some underpainting in watercolor to get some color in there, and then using that paper. I have another piece of the brown because I bought the bigger sheet, so I cut it down to 5x7. So I'll probably use that again tomorrow and just continue to practice with it. But I did really enjoy how these worked on this paper. I really, really like this paper. I'm also curious about how they might work with some of the pastel primer that I used with the soft pastel. So I might do some prep there and see how that works too. Why not try it all out? The piece I did today, I thought I would do one of my blue people, my blue-green people. And so I pulled out some of those colors. And as is usually the case, the eye color I determine based on whatever is going to give me the most contrast with the skin color. So since I was doing sort of a bluey green person, I went for orange in the eye. And what I have in the eye, I think, is maybe 2 layers. That's it. The pigment stayed so rich on this paper, I really didn't need to do much to build it up at all. And I really, really enjoyed that. So I'm just kind of building in shadows. One, I've determined the light source is coming from the right-hand side of the painting. And so the left side of her face is in shadow. I'm already hating the nose. Noses are my nemesis sometimes. And so I'm like, okay, I'm just going to keep working on other parts of the face, and I'll get there eventually. So I'm using that green as my yellow. If you think about a primary palette, the oranges are my reds, and that bright green is my yellow. And then I'm using the blues as my blues. And then I've got a couple of shades of gray and some sepia. Believe it or not, that dark color is not black, it's sepia. And that's what I've used for the pupils of her eyes, and I'll add that into some of the shadows. And what you may not see me do, because I did need to pause this a few times, the other stuff was going on when I was working on this, and I didn't always remember to hit record again. So there were a few things that I missed capturing on video. But as I go through, especially towards the end, I layer in some of the orange over the blue to help neutralize it a little bit. So when we do the close-up at the end, keep an eye out for that. And that I really loved, how just a very gentle layer over the top, and then I just sort of rubbed it with my finger, helped neutralize those colors really easily. So I could build up the underpainting with the bright colors and then neutralize them at the end without having to press really hard or lose a lot of tooth. So that was a technique that worked well for me on this painting today. And as I continue to work with these, I'll see if there are other techniques that seem to work as well. Because the paper gripped it so hard, I really did not use my color shaper very much. Maybe a little bit after I had built up enough layers that I knew that it would work. But on those really thin layers at the beginning, the pigment was not going to move. At this point, I've got her pretty much blocked in. Her nose I'll need to fix, and therefore her mouth. But when I was thinking about hair color, I didn't want to do something orange or yellow, too contrasty. I didn't really want to introduce a bunch of new colors. So I ended up going with gray. And what was interesting here was she started to take on a story. And this is what I love about these paintings. They just sort of start talking to me. So I added this gray, and as I was working on her, and I get to her clothing here in a little bit, she sort of started to take on the life of maybe somebody that lived in the 1800s or earlier, 1700s, 1800s probably. And it was just interesting sort of how it came together. So here I'm trying to use the color shaper to blend a little bit, and it worked a little bit, but not super great. So I fixed her nose, and I moved her mouth over a little bit, and I'll continue to work on that a little bit more. But I'm trying to think about her clothing now. And as I was doing it, I adjusted the shape. I made it wider because she's turned a little bit more towards the camera or the viewer than I thought she was initially. And so I used that dark sepia color. And as I did that, it just sort of seemed like she needed like kind of this lace sort of collar. And so I did that with the same grays and blues that I used in her hair. And then I added some buttons and a little bit of highlight in there. You'll see me add that in a minute. So she kind of looks like she's wearing this, again, like this sort of dress that you might see in the 1800s, pictures of people from that time period. So I thought that was really interesting. And as I was sort of leaning into this story of her being potentially from that time period, I started to think about, okay, what do I want to do with the background? I thought about leaving it. It's that brown color. And she stands out pretty significantly, partly because of the colors and the light, but partly because of the vibrancy of it. So I thought I wanted to add a little bit of texture and color to the background. And as I did it, I pulled out a couple of shades of brown, and then I layered some of the sepia, and it kind of reminded me of wood. And I thought, okay, well, maybe she's inside like a log cabin or something like that. And so that was sort of the story that evolved around her with her bright green and blue skin. But, whatever, we're going with it. But if you look really closely, especially in some of the shadows, you'll see I've added some layers of different shades of orange to neutralize her skin a little bit. And I liked how that came out a lot better. It gave a little more richness to her and a little bit more warmth. That's sometimes one of the things that I don't always like about using blues and greens as the skin color is sometimes they can look a little dead. Sometimes they can look a little sickly. And so I like to add a little bit of warmth, especially since I wasn't using yellow, a warm yellow. I was using that green. So adding those oranges in really helped, I think. But that was day 81. So still learning about these wax pastels, still enjoying them, still trying them out and seeing what tomorrow brings. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for joining me. I hope you're doing well. Take care of you, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.